Q&A at the end. So just to briefly introduce myself, my name is Nikita Burke and I'm the new Programme Manager with Evidence Synthesis Ireland. And we're delighted to welcome you today to our webinar series. So Evidence Synthesis Ireland is an all-Ireland initiative that is funded by the Health Research Board and the Research and Development Division of the Public Health Agency in Northern Ireland. So our aim is to build evidence synthesis knowledge, awareness and capacity on the island of Ireland. And one of those activities includes our monthly webinar. So we're delighted to have Dr. Aoife Egan here today, and Aoife graduated with her medical degree in NUI Galway in 2007, and she completed her training in general medicine and endocrinology in the Royal College of Physicians in Ireland. She was conferred with her PhD from NUI Galway in 2017, and the title of her thesis was The Importance of Continuum of Care Before, During and After Pregnancy in Women with Type 1 and Type 2 Diabetes along the Irish Atlantic Seaboard. And for the past 2 years, she's been working as a fellow in endocrinology in the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, where she has clinical research and teaching responsibilities. So Aoife became an Evidence Synthesis Ireland Fellow in 2018, and she was hosted by Andrea Trico and her Knowledge Synthesis team in the Knowledge Translation Programme in the Lee Ka-shing Knowledge Institute in St. Michael's in Toronto. So as part of this experience, she completed online learning module and systematic review methodology and participated in a rapid systematic review that was commissioned by Diabetes Canada. So she's going to talk a little bit more about that. So Aoife will talk about her experience, the fellowship scheme, the networking and opportunities, and we'll do this for about 40 to 45 minutes, and that will follow it up with a Q&A presentation afterwards. So Aoife, are you okay there with your slides?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks for the introduction.
Great, I'll hand over to you. So.
Okay, so I hope everyone can see these slides. It's an honor and a privilege for me to be here and speak about the experience that I had as an Evidence Synthesis Ireland Fellow over the past year. So Nikita's already given a great introduction, but I just wanted to maybe give a little bit more background and explain where I came from before I joined this program. So in 2007, I graduated from medical school at NUI Galway. So I'm a physician by training. And then I spent 3 years doing my general medical training. This was done mostly in the Mater Hospital in Dublin, but I also worked in Mayo Clinic, Arizona for about 6 months of that training. And then between 2010 and 2014, I did my clinical endocrinology training, again in Ireland, working in Dublin hospitals and also in Galway Hospital in the west of Ireland. So I then decided to continue on my work in Galway, and I did a PhD between 2013 to 2014 until 2017. And that was in the area of diabetes and pregnancy. And I'll talk a little bit more about that because it was during that time that I had my first introduction to evidence synthesis. So once I completed my PhD, like many physicians, I went abroad and I found myself in the Mayo Clinic, Rochester, and that's where I am currently. I'm working there as an endocrine fellow, so it's a mixed clinical and research job. So I've been able to continue on some of my research interests in diabetes and pregnancy. And I'll be due to finish that fellowship in July of 2020 and will take up a consultant's position there. So it's been many years of training, but it's introduced me to a lot of people and given me lots of opportunities. I wanted to mention my PhD. So I worked under the supervision of Professor Fidel Madun, who many of you will be familiar with. So she's based at NUI Galway and also has clinical responsibilities at University Hospital Galway. And my PhD involved some epidemiological studies, also some healthcare delivery projects surrounding care for women with diabetes along the Irish Atlantic seaboard. But most importantly, it gave me some exposure to evidence synthesis. So as part of my PhD, I did a core outcome set. And for those of you who aren't familiar with core outcome sets, They are basically key sets of outcomes that should be reported in all studies relevant to a particular area. So we developed a core outcome set for pre-pregnancy care for women with diabetes. And these core outcome sets generally are developed through 3 discrete work packages. And the first step is a systematic literature review, whereby you collect all previously reported outcomes. And then you pass through various processes, then ending in a consensus meeting where the final list of key outcomes are selected based on what key stakeholders feel are important. So that was my first kind of brief introduction to the world of systematic review on a practical level, at least, and it really kind of piqued my interest. I subsequently had the opportunity to work with Dr. Linda Beastie, who I think is listening in today, and Professor Declan Devan on 2 Cochrane reviews. And again, I was a co-author on these reviews. I wasn't taking the lead in it, but it gave me a further introduction to this world of data synthesis. So when the Evidence Synthesis Ireland Fellowship came along, for me, the timing was perfect. The schedule that I was working on over here in the US had some flexibility, so I was able to commit to an additional project like this. I was also aiming to expand my skills in the area of data synthesis, and the topic was really of interest to me because it related to diabetes. The mentor and the host institution, I think the mentor, those of you who know Dr. Trico know that she's a very accomplished person. She is an epidemiologist by background. She is an MSc in epidemiology and then a PhD in population health. And she is a director of the knowledge synthesis team, which operates out of the knowledge translation program of the La Ka-Shing Knowledge Institute. And this is based in St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto. So she has a wide publication list. She's published over 180 peer-reviewed articles, and she holds a Tier 2 Canada Research Chair in Knowledge Synthesis. And so this is important. Her research is therefore funded, and so she leads a group of about 30 people, and their focus is knowledge translation. So the first part of my joining their group was actually to sign on to this online module, which was entitled An Introductory Course on Systematic Reviews and Meta-Analysis. And I really couldn't say enough about this module. It was a really great opportunity for me to get. Typically, if you want to do this course, it incorporates a significant fee. And so I was allowed to take this course just as part of being an ESI scholar. So the course contained 18 modules, and each module had a video that you could watch. There was some reading material, and then there was some self-assessment. And the topics that were covered in this were pretty broad, but it discussed how to formulate a review question, how to develop a review protocol, clear instructions on how data abstraction should take place. There was a lot of information on quality of studies and how to appraise the quality of studies. And it even went into detail on how to perform a meta-analysis. So if you join a project, it's unlikely that you're going to get to do every single aspect of it, or just depending on the type of the study, there may be some gaps. And I feel that, you know, participating in this module really filled in all those gaps for me, and, you know, obviously built my expertise and my ability to perform a systematic review and meta-analysis, but also really gave me a good idea of how to really well appraise published research. So the next step really then was the project itself. And the project I thought was fascinating. It was called The Effects of Recreational Cannabis Use in People with Diabetes, a Rapid Review. And so this study was registered with Prospero, which is a registry of systematic reviews. And the funding for the actual study came through two sources. So first of all, Diabetes Canada had actually come to Dr. Trico and her group to commission this report. So they provided a certain amount of funding. And the timing was interesting because cannabis has actually just been legalized in Canada, and that's why Diabetes Canada were particularly interested in looking at this question. However, there was also some additional funding through the Spore Evidence Alliance. And this is a really great group of people, of which Dr. Trico is one of the leaders. But it's basically a Canadian group of researchers who are supported by the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, which is essentially the equivalent of the Health Research Board in Ireland. And they have funding to conduct evidence synthesis and help with knowledge translation. So basically, various bodies, be it medical organizations, groups such as Diabetes Canada or other interest groups, will come to the Spore Evidence Alliance, maybe with some funding or all of the funding or no funding, and ask if they could do a systematic review or some form of knowledge translation. So it's kind of a group that work together to try and deliver this information across Canada. So this particular study was supported by this group as well as Diabetes Canada. So I wanted just to kind of point out what my participation was in the project itself. So when I joined the group, it was late 2018, early 2019. The protocol for the study was already written, and a group of librarians based in Canada had already done the searching. So the abstracts were ready to go. So I kind of jumped head in with the screening process, and I participated in the screening process, data extraction, participated in the analysis of the data, and actually had quite a big role in the write-up of the study. And now as it's moving into the publication process, I've been involved in that too. And so that's, I suppose, my medical knowledge came in quite useful in the write-up because I was able to help put the findings into a medical kind of clinical context. So this was my timeline, and I understand that all of the projects are different, so the timelines will be different for everyone. But in December 2018, I got access to the online module and had my introductions to the group. And then there was the Christmas holidays and that, so there was a little bit of a lull. But between January and May was when most of the work on the project took place. So this was when the data extraction took place and the data analysis. And so this was quite a busy time, and you know, rapid reviews by their name tend to be quite rapid, so there was quite a bit of work during this time period. But by June 2019, the summary report was pretty much ready to send to Diabetes Canada. So all the co-authors, including myself, had gone through the report and were happy with everything that was in it. And then between July and October, that's when we prepared, and the manuscript, and like everything, the first journal didn't accept it. So now we have submitted it to a second journal and they seem to be giving some favorable feedback. So we're hoping that it will actually be published sooner rather than later. So I wanted to talk about my own project in a little bit of detail, just because I thought it was actually a really interesting project and the results to me were fascinating. So it was a rapid review. And again, this was my first time participating in a rapid review. So this is a form of evidence synthesis that can provide more timely information for decision making compared to the traditional systematic review, which can be very time consuming, and there can be quite a delay in terms of when the results actually become available. And you can see here, when you're looking at confidence in a study from high confidence to low confidence, obviously a full systematic review takes lead, But rapid evidence assessment is quite important too. And I think, as long as it's done according to a rigorous methodology, you can get quite a comprehensive result from these studies. So the time frame for a rapid review typically is about 5 weeks, but of course this can vary on many factors. And our one did take a little bit longer than that 5-week time frame, but it really does depend on the resources available, the quantity and the quality of the literature, depending on the topic that you're exploring, and the expertise or experience of the reviewers. Generally, the question is more narrow just because of the constraints of a rapid review, but you would still use your PICO, so population intervention comparison and outcomes. And again, when doing a systematic review, we generally search as many databases as possible. But with a rapid review, you typically select what you would consider to be high yield data sets. When you're selecting the studies for inclusion, you would still apply inclusion and exclusion criteria, and the appraisal should still be critical and rigorous, but again, time limited. And typically from the synthesis point of view, it's generally a descriptive summary or categorization of the data rather than moving on to a meta-analysis, but it still could be quantitative depending on your results. So for our particular study, and again, these are the unpublished results as of yet, but we looked at quantitative studies reporting the effects of recreational cannabis on metabolic factors and self-management behaviors in people 13 or older with diabetes or prediabetes. And 3 databases were searched by the librarians. And we then did the study selection, data abstraction, and quality appraisal. And this was completed in duplicate by pairs of reviewers, and I was one of those reviewers. We worked independently and then compared our results, and any discrepancies were resolved by an independent third reviewer. And there were pilot tests prior to each stage to train reviewers and ensure consistency. So there were a number of learners on the study, including myself and a couple of others. And so the pilot tests I found were really good and kind of reassured me that I was on the right track, because it is a lot of responsibility to go through the studies and decide whether you'd include or exclude a particular study. So before each stage, there was a pilot test sent around of between 3 and 5 studies. And Patricia Rios, who was kind of taking the lead on the ground as one of Dr. Trico's researchers, went through with us where we went wrong and what exactly we needed to do. So that was really good guidance to get. It was during this time, the study selection and data abstraction, that things happened quite rapidly. And so it was important that if you weren't going to be available for a few days here or there, that you would let the team know. Because, for example, you would get an email on a Monday with data to be abstracted from a number of studies as a pilot, and that pilot data would need to be returned within 48 hours, and then you'd get the actual data to abstract from the studies that were being included. And again, there would be a turnaround of 2 to 3 days. So for me, this was, a busy time. We then collected the data from the included studies, and we summarized this data descriptively and tabulated it to allow cross-comparison. So our search resulted in over 1,800 citations, but actually the majority of them were excluded, and just 59 full text articles were included for screening. And it was kind of challenging because when you look at cannabis and marijuana and all the other search terms that we included, we wanted to exclude anything to do with medicinal cannabis or endocannabinoids, which are used in a medicinal fashion. So there was an awful lot of studies that included these. So, we really had to look carefully at the wording before excluding a title. Ultimately, we just had 6 observational studies that were included in the review. So it was really narrowed down. But the results were interesting. So 5 out of the 6 studies reported a higher A1C in people with type 1 diabetes who consumed recreational cannabis. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the A1C, this is basically a measure of glucose control and reflects how well the type 1 diabetes is managed. So there was quite a strong signal that people that are using recreational cannabis in the setting of type 1 diabetes did not have their condition as well managed. One study reported an increased risk for diabetic ketoacidosis, and diabetic ketoacidosis is a condition by which keto acids, a particular type of acid, build up in the blood in the absence of enough insulin, and this can result in hospitalization and mortality for people with type 1 diabetes. In people with type 2 diabetes, so slightly different condition, but there were increased risks for peripheral arterial occlusion and myocardial infarction. So things like disease of the blood vessels causing heart attacks were higher in people with type 2 who were consuming recreational cannabis. And for people with type 1 and type 2 diabetes, the risk for renal disease was higher. So I found this very interesting. As a physician, I had not been aware that recreational cannabis would cause these problems. And I would probably argue that in the US, where I'm based now, and in Canada, as you know, the cannabis has become legal in many locations, I think the usage rates are much higher than what I would have experienced back home in Ireland. So it's going to be important for me in terms of counselling patients now to know this information. So that was basically the summary of the findings of our study. And I wanted to mention a little bit more about the extra benefits, you know, when you're a fellow with Evidence Synthesis Ireland. So there's actually a bursary for travel and dissemination expenses up to a value of €1,000 available to each fellow. And so I was delighted when I saw this, because I'm always one to spend money if it's available. And so you could have used this to travel to the host centre or to attend a seminar or a conference of your interest. And the other perk is that fellows can attend all the ESI training workshops for free during their fellowship. And again, unfortunately, I'm based over in the US, so I haven't been in a position to attend them, but I'm sorry, because a number of the training workshops just look really excellent. So I would encourage all the fellows to attend them. But I did use my bursary and I visited the host institution. So here I am with Dr. Trico and her group of, a selection of her group of researchers. Also present in the picture is actually Dr. Jennifer McSherry, who some of you might know. She was also an ESI fellow with me in the same intake. And so it was really lovely that she got to visit at the same time. So I have to say that going to Toronto and meeting with Dr. Trico and her group really consolidated the experience for me and really just built on the positivity of the ESI fellowship experience. There's nothing that can kind of replicate meeting face to face. And I think, you know, they really rolled out the red carpet for us. We got to meet with the team. We had one-on-one time with Dr. Trico where we had some brainstorming sessions, came up with ideas for future collaborations, and had a tour of her department and really saw the nuts and bolts of how her setup works. And it really does work like a very well-oiled machine. They have a number of projects. I think when we were there, there was over 30 projects running through her group. And the way she has built up collaborations, not just nationally, but also internationally, I think is really inspirational. And hopefully we'll all of us who have worked with her will be able to kind of draw on our experience and, you know, build some similar links. So for me, I gained specific knowledge and skills in evidence synthesis methodology. Again, between the module and the actual hands-on experience as part of the rapid review team. I don't think I could have achieved this by just reading stuff that was in the literature are, you know, maybe working more peripherally. I think the ESI setup and the way Dr. Trico's group welcomed me into the fold, I think allowed me to just really gain a lot of expertise. The specific topic, of course, I now feel like I have a lot of knowledge on the area of recreational cannabis and how it affects people with diabetes. So that's a bonus. I was interested in the information dissemination part and how they organize that, both in their presentation of the report to Diabetes Canada and also creating the manuscript and circulating it within the group prior to proceeding with publication. So that was all really positive. For me, as a kind of a more early career researcher, I think the networking opportunity that I got was absolutely fantastic. So this really provided a unique opportunity to work with a different research group. There is the possibility, as I mentioned, for future collaborations. And I really think that that will happen, as you know, I've remained in contact with Dr. Trico, and already more recently was involved in a group developing a core outcome set for gestational diabetes. And just Dr. Trico, you know, a one-line email to her, and she helped with the e-Delphi process and generated a lot of interest in that study, you know, in Canada. So I think you know, she's very supportive of projects that we would be able to collaborate on. I think some issues to consider before you embark on a project would be the time involved. So for me, I was very lucky to be in the job that I'm in and have some flexibility and support from my own institution here. So every project kind of differs. I guess you don't really know some of these factors until you delve into the project, because it depends on the type of review that's been done, but also the subject matter. So for us, it ended up that there was actually quite few studies included in the systematic review, but the workload could have been quite different if there was many more studies in the review. I kind of knew that this was a rapid review, and so that, you know, time was of the essence. So I wanted to be available for each step of the process. So that kind of period of January to March, I made sure that I was available at all times to participate. So while the work is flexible, I mean, you know, all of this communication is done pretty much online. You do have to be able to dedicate a certain amount of time to this study. The mentor is obviously very important. You want to be linked with a mentor that you feel you can gel with and work well with. And I think I was extremely lucky. I had heard a lot about Dr. Trico and looked up some of her publications, and I knew that she was working in areas that were of interest to me. And she really was an excellent mentor. So I had monthly meetings with her between January and September of this year. And these were obviously conducted over the phone, but she really took the time to make sure that I was fitting well into the group, that I was getting experience in the areas that I needed to get experience in, and really took the time to go through all the paperwork from Evidence Synthesis Ireland at each step of the evaluations, etc. So that was really important for me. And she's actually generously, you know, offered to continue on with meetings every second month, myself and Dr. McSharry combined. So that's just really generous of her and shows how invested she is in this mentorship program. Obviously, you need to be interested in the review topic. So I ended up doing a lot of outside reading, just so that I was able to be a useful member of the team and also be able to provide that clinical perspective on the findings. The type of review is important too. So, you know, for rapid reviews, as I mentioned, there often isn't a meta-analysis component. And for me, the online module kind of filled in the gaps that weren't covered during the review. And I was extremely important in looking at how studies are extremely interested in looking at how studies were appraised and data were extracted. So for me, the fit was just perfect. Again, the stage of the review, I was happy enough that I had read the protocol. I wasn't involved in the protocol development. And the Dr. Trico's group is so big that there are people with different areas of expertise, and so the librarians were going to be taking the lead in the searches. And so that suited me fine, but again, you may want to be involved in a review that's at a more earlier stage so that you can be there from the very beginning. So that is generally what I had wanted to discuss and go over in terms of my own experience. I have to say it was an extremely positive one. I sort of came upon it by chance, and again, it just shows the importance of, you know, building links with colleagues. And I think the application process has probably become a lot more rigorous now as the program has developed, maybe even more competitive. But I wanted to say that I'm more than happy to discuss with anyone that's interested in becoming a fellow on the ESI program, in discuss things in more detail or help with applications. I wanted to mention, obviously ESI and also NUI Galway, which is my alma mater and will always be very dear to me. So it was great that I was able to continue on and have a connection with NUI Galway. My own institution, Mayo Clinic, they have been very open to me participating in opportunities such as this. So I'm really grateful to them. Obviously the Knowledge Translation Program team at Toronto, and the SPORE Evidence Alliance, which is that trans-Canadian wider research group. And finally, Diabetes Canada, who obviously came up with the idea originally and commissioned the project. So without Diabetes Canada, the project wouldn't have happened, and I probably wouldn't be involved with Dr. Trico's group. So I'm delighted that they took that initiative on, you know, as patient advocates to look at this important question. So with that, my information that I wanted to discuss is completed. So I think there's going to be some time for questions. So I'll maybe pass over to Nikita.
That's great. Thanks a million, Aoife. That was incredibly interesting to hear about your experience as one of the first ESI Fellows. Can I just say well done on your work. It's great to see that there's, you know, potentially a lot of impact from this, and I think it highlights the importance of doing research that is aligned to priorities as well, and as you mentioned, with funding behind it as well. So if people have questions, if they can put them in the Q&A. I have a couple, but I see one here from Declan Devan, who has asked, he said, brilliant job, Aoife, looking ahead for your next steps. If there was advanced fellowships, what would you want them to include?
I think an advanced fellowship would be a great idea. I would think that probably for me now, having done the online module and, you know, working as a team member, I think an advanced fellowship would probably include, you know, you to a certain extent coming up with an idea for a systematic review and having some, you know, independence, and within the team being more of a team leader rather than a team player. So obviously there's a lot of overlap between those two roles, but I think, you know, taking the lead and having a mentor there to support you, obviously, but you maybe generating the ideas and leading the group to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm. Great. And would you say how much did it help you to learn from an international experience, an international perspective in, say, Canada? And you already have your US experience, but how has that helped your career, your research?
Yeah, so I think as a physician, we're often on the move quite a lot. So we value international experience. So it just allows you to see how things are maybe done differently. So, and ultimately, hopefully bring that back to Ireland at some point in the future. So, you know, going over to Canada and seeing how her group were essentially funded. She went through in detail with us how she started, you know, from an early career researcher to kind of building up to the stage which she's at now, which is obviously incredibly accomplished, but just ways that she managed to secure just small amounts of funding and then gradually kind of build her way into getting, you know, state funding, and then been a leader within that Canadian kind of institute, I think was really important. I hopefully will be, you know, applying for some national funding here probably first, and hopefully from the HRB at some point. And I think, you know, being able to reach out to her now as a collaborator on that funding will be very important, because, you know, most funding bodies look very favorably on kind of international collaborations. So I think, you know, it really was a great opportunity for me, and hopefully I'll be able to continue to take advantage of it moving forward.
Sure. And also you mentioned that you used your fellowship to go over to partake in the lab visit and that. So did you take the initiative on that, or did your mentor suggest that yourself and Jenny McSherry should attend?
Yeah, so Andrea had mentioned, you know, the bursary, and when I started working with her first, I hadn't thought about a trip, but, you know, she had said, you know, if you don't have a specific conference that you need to go to or whatever, we'd be more than happy to have you over here. So she kind of set the ball rolling on that, and I was happy to go along with it. I'm lucky enough that where I am at the moment, we do have some funding to attend conferences and that. So for me, I just kind of wanted to use the ESI Fellowship to do something relevant to that specific project. And the way it worked out with kind of the Canadian Diabetes Group wanting the results quickly and then us proceeding straight to publication, we didn't actually take this project to a meeting. So we didn't present an abstract anywhere. And so I think it was just perfect that it worked out that I got to visit the group. And I would encourage anyone that you know, has the opportunity to actually go and visit the group, because as I mentioned, it's just hard to replace actually meeting people in person and chatting to them. So that was good. I think Dr. Trico is actually coming to Ireland in the new year to participate in a Cochrane meeting. So I think that would be a good opportunity for people to meet with her and you know, see what she has to say. So yeah,
it's great. It's a great point. Yeah, the Cochrane Ireland and Cochrane UK Joint Symposium will be on the 21st and 22nd of April. So we hope to see some of you there. So great. I've got a couple more questions coming in now. Comment from Linda, who said, thank you. Difficult to ask questions. You did a great job and you covered many of the queries that I had, which was the same with me. So thanks for a great presentation. And we have Kira Gleason. Thanks for a great presentation. Current ESI fellow at an early stage with a few questions. Wonder at what stage in the process would you consider a good time to visit the mentor? And how long did you spend there? There's a few more questions.
Oh yeah, I can actually see them here.
You can see them, okay.
Okay, so I probably wouldn't go until you'd been working on the project for a few months. And I think, so, you know, I would at least have worked with the group for maybe 3 or 4 months and then consider a trip over kind of any time after that. It's nice to have kind of gotten used to how things are rolling and be very, very familiar with the project and that. And, you know, it may be that when you go and visit that you'll be able to actually work on the project to a certain extent if it's still in process. Like for me, the project was kind of pretty much complete by the time I went over. But it was still a really valuable experience. But I would say, yeah, depending on the project, about 3 to 4 months in. And it does take some time to organize. That's the other thing, you know, these people are busy and they'll want you to come at a time when the group are all there, you know, and everything is in full flow so you can get the best out of the experience. I just actually spent 3 days in Toronto, but I just spent 1 day with the group. So I think we arrived early in the morning and met with Dr. Trico maybe around 8:30 a.m. and then we were with the group for the full day and finished around 4 p.m. So it was really nice. They had a lunch for us and a really warm welcome. So that was great. Any tips for working on a first systematic review? So I was a bit nervous when it came to the study selection that I would exclude something that was very important or crucial and ruin the whole thing. So that's just my own personality at play, I think. But I think just to be reassured that the groups that have been selected are pretty well established groups, and in general the study is going to run with or without you. So that's the kind of unique position that you're in as an ESI fellow, that you're there to learn. They understand that you're there to learn, and probably most things that you do are going to be kind of cross-checked and looked over, and that's just a great, you know, opportunity. So I think just go with it, be open to whatever they suggest, and try and learn as much as possible. Getting the most from the networking opportunities. So again, I think a face-to-face visit is probably the best way. It's kind of harder when you're just doing things over the phone to kind of really develop a definite relationship. So I think if they're on the other side of the world, if you can, going to visit would be good. But otherwise, if that's not going to be possible, you know, maybe it wouldn't be possible, say, to take a trip to Australia or whatever. I would probably just think about what other studies you're doing at the moment. And so try and involve your mentor and maybe some team members, if possible, in other studies that you're doing as part of your research portfolio. So I think that would be good. And just to constantly remind the group that, you know, if you do have time, if you do, just remind the group that you would be happy to participate in other projects that were ongoing. So Dr. Trico's group, for example, is looking at insulins in type 1 diabetes now, at just a study in that area. And I have, you know, volunteered to be available to help out on that study if they need any medical input or even participating in the review itself. I don't really have any other online training to recommend. I found that the module was excellent, but, you know, maybe talking to your own mentor, you know, who would have greater expertise in this area, I think might be able to guide you. And then for me, the team plan to disseminate the results of the rapid review through an open access publication. So that's the stage that we're at the moment. So Diabetes Canada were the kind of original knowledge users, but they obviously are happy for the results to be disseminated as widely as possible. So we have submitted to an open access journal so that basically anybody can see the results. And Dr. Trico and her group feel quite passionately actually about open access, and, you know, that people shouldn't have to have a journal subscription just to be able to see the results. So that's a debate in itself, but it's where our study will go. So hopefully you'll be able to see it sooner rather than later.
Great, thanks Aoife. I have another question there from Alexandra, she said she loves your work and it's great to hear you talk when she's doing a PhD in UL. She's applied twice for the fellowship with no success, and she wants to know, is there any tips for someone who's so keen to be involved? So I would say that the competition is fierce and it's very high from that perspective anyway. So I would say, you know, keep trying and don't give up. But if you have any tips.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm sorry because I say the competition has probably increased as, you know, there's more information out there and more people have passed through and positive feedback and everything else. But, you know, keep trying. I suppose, like, anytime I've submitted something and it hasn't got accepted, I always look for some feedback. So I think it would be no harm to maybe reach out to the folks at ESI to get some feedback. And, you know, I'm more than happy to look at an application. I'm sure any of the other scholars or previous fellows are happy to look at an application either. So just reach out and ask people for advice. Yeah. And
agreed.
so yeah, trying to build on what you have. I mean, I had some experience in evidence synthesis, but I wouldn't have considered myself an expert, and that's the whole point of the program, is to gain that expertise. But, you know, just keep working hard and ask for help and support. Yeah.
Thank you for your generosity as well in offering that. And also Declan reiterates that, you know, get your applications proofread and get feedback from multiple people with different perspectives, and that will help you to identify, you know, where there might be weaknesses that you could improve on as well. So I have a question here from Fiona that I had as well. I said, hi Aoife, fantastic talk. I know you mentioned that it was ideal that this fellowship, you know, was an area that interested you, you know, in your research and your clinical practice as well. But would you recommend pursuing the fellowship even if the research area is completely different or completely new, so that, you know, you're developing and learning your skills in the methodology rather than the topic of interest? Could you imagine how that would be, or would you have any further thoughts?
Yeah, that's a really good question actually. And, you know, I suppose I hadn't thought about it. I had kind of plugged that I was interested in the area, so it was a good fit. But no, I think you have to have some interest in it, or else it's going to be a bit of a struggle to, you know, go through maybe a few hundred abstracts if you really have absolutely no interest in the area. But I think, you know, if you do feel that, you know, the fellowship would be, or, you know, that the group that you would be working with would be able to provide you the support you need to basically advance your career and develop that skill set, then I think it's more than reasonable to apply. I'm just thinking, you know, a lot of the skills that I learned, I could have learned in a, you know, doing a different study in a different area. And I guess it depends as well what your background is, you know, like for me, for the last, I mean, the guts of the last 10 years, I've been working in the area of diabetes. So I kind of didn't think twice about this. Had the opportunity come up in a different area, but it would allow me to kind of advance my skills, I probably would have considered it as well. You know, it just, I was lucky, I guess. But if you really feel that you'll be able to, you know, participate in an active way, I think that's more than reasonable if it's not exactly along your previous research interests.
Great. Well, if there's not any further questions from anybody, and I don't think there is, I'd just like to thank you again, Aoife, and thanks for everyone who participated in the discussion as well. It was great to get to tease out some of those, a bit of advice a bit further. So thank you again, Aoife, for your time that you put into this presentation and being here today. And I will put the recording of this up on the website later so that people are able to review it as well, which will be great. And as well, if you're not already signed up to our newsletter, please do go on to evidencesynthesisireland.ie where you can register for our newsletter. You can find out about more webinars, other trainings, and when the fellows calls are announced as well. And we're on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn as well. And just to let you know as well that the next webinar is on December 2nd at 12 p.m. with Dr. Ashrita Sharan, who is an evidence synthesis specialist with the Camel Collaboration in UK, and she's going, UK and Northern Ireland, she's going to be talking about evidence and gap maps as well. So your feedback is very welcome. We will be sending around a survey afterwards. Please do fill it out because it's very important to us to shape the future direction. And if you have any ideas for webinar speakers or topics, please do let us know. So thanks everybody again, and thank you, Aoife, and thanks for participating, and we'll see you all again soon.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.